Oh, what's up, guys?
Second,
It's gonna be
per
another
minion
Bard
kill.
game.
Champion kills and assists grant 45 health and 1.5 health regen per 5 seconds. Bonuses cap at 450 health and plus 15 health regen per 5. And this was massive. This meant that stacking this item up gave you a ton of HP. And eventually, once we finally got towards Season 2, we saw the rise of a new build, the Atmogs. Atmogs is a combined term between Atma's Impaler and Warmog's Armor, two items that were very strong at the time. Warmog still exists in the game, but Atma's is no longer available. Atma's Impaler at the time was an item that gave you 45 armor and 18% critical strike chance, as well as a passive making it that you gained attack damage equal to 1.5% of your maximum health. This meant that the combo of building an Atma's Impaler, which was a relatively cheap item, always costing anywhere between 2,300 and 2,600 gold, as well as building a Warmogs, gave you armor, HP, critical strike chance, and attack damage. This ended up meaning that a lot of champions were very tanky and very hard to kill, while also dealing a lot of damage and having crit chance. It was the meta golem of top lane. Every top laner had the chance to become a bruiser simply by building Atma's Impaler and Warmogs. It was the core of what made bruisers good. Both items were very strong and synergized a massive amount due to the damage and tankiness that you would get. If you also combine this with a Trinity Force, these champions would become nearly unkillable. Frozen Mallet could also be built so it could have a place along with Warmogs, making you incredibly sticky on your opponents. And it also so happened that champions that Riot released that year, such as Darius and Jace, fit
I want to
into
auto
this
that,
meta
but
very well.
with passive it would bring it below the amount of health.
Well, and for the time, Darius's ultimate was unmatched. It was easily one of the most powerful ultimates in the game. Sustain was dead, and champions like Udyr top lane completely fell off the map and out of top lane, and champions like Jax, Olaf, Darius, Jace, and Aurelia had a great time dueling other champions. The meta and the mentality had completely changed. Instead of worrying about having sustain so you could trade blow for blow, back and forth, top laners had to worry about flat out dying, being 100 to 0, and sustain at this point just wasn't going to cut it. At the time, the Asian teams dominated the Season 2 World Championship.
It's so annoying playing against Lux because once he gets queued, he's pretty much forced into using a summary dying.
It is worth mentioning that teams implemented strategies of dealing with the AD carry and support going top to force a 2v1 against the enemy top lane.
They're gonna want to go in for that W.
And playing lanes of sustain and attrition just did not work anymore. You would easily be tower dive in 2v1 or 3v1 situations, so you had to be able to defend for yourself. When you speak about trends in history, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly when they started because usually these are things that ramp up over time. But exactly 6 years ago, on Valentine's Day, February 14th of 2012, CivHD, one of the biggest content creators for League of all time, released a video showing his new Atmog's Twisted Fate, and this video has amassed over 900,000 views to date. This trend, however, could have possibly been picked up even before this. Roche Court posted on the forums in October of 2011 saying Atmogs has been built in every game. He mentioned some of the champions he was seeing with this, such as Shaco, Gangplank, Aurelia, Garen, Jarvan, Sion. Any AD champion with this build is just so strong and it's game breaking. But really, aside from a small conversion reduction on Atlas and Taylor, this was left relatively untouched by Riot. And once we reached the end of Season 2, the World Championships would show the true power of these bruisers. Jace, Irelia, Olaf, Yorick, and Jax were some of the most popular top lane picks for the pros, and Moscow 5's Darien even whipped out a Xin Zhao top lane pick. Top laners wanted to duel, take Ignite, and beat each other to death until somebody came out on top. And even though Shen was and still is a tank to this day, his builds at the time did consist of a lot of attack speed items. Bruisers, a few tanks, and a few AP carries were the go-to selection for top lane players. With a few champions sitting at the top of the charts receiving nerfs, it appeared like top lane was one of the most dynamic roles in the game, having 3 different styles being good, and you really had to know how to play against a few different champions. But regardless, the role was thought to be in a pretty okay spot, relatively balanced with a few exceptions here and there like the Atmogs, but it was pretty cool. Surely the meta wouldn't make any drastic changes. I mean, Riot wouldn't implement an item that would make bruisers way overpowered. Surely there wouldn't be some cheesy strategy that would come up for the early game to make some champions have to get gutted in the process to keep balance for Season 3. I mean, come on.
Man, no one else is
right?
coming to help me out. Damn, that chaos. I was hoping it would hit the Yas and trigger the stun. I have no mana.
Considered by
They might
many
try to eat me
players
over
to
the wall.
be the single biggest mistake in Riot's balancing history, Season 3 Black Cleaver is the most overpowered item to ever exist. When this was released, this item gave you 250 health, 50 attack damage, 10% cooldown reduction, 15 flat armor penetration, which was the old version of lethality, and its passive that gave you armor shred, all stacked. All of the stats on this item stacked, including the passive. What this meant is that if you built several of these, you can eventually be dealing true damage to your opponent while still getting attack damage, while still getting HP and cooldown reduction. With 4 of them, you dealt true damage, you had 1000 HP, 200 AD, and 40% CDR. According to several different sources, champions who could have used this, such as Talon, Riven, Pantheon, and Misfortune, had their win rates jump by over 10%. If this is not the biggest overlook by Riot, I don't know what is, and this was the term of League of Black Cleavers. Eventually, it was fixed, and it made it so the passive was no longer stackable and the item was nerfed, but it did show that this item really did pave the way for bruisers to become good once again in Season 3, and even AD assassins to become god tier. For the Season 2 World Championship, Rengar
Unleash the
and Kha'Zix,
scuttle,
some
I
of the
guess. There's
newest
nothing else to
champions
do.
in the game at the time, were globally disabled.
Actually,
But as soon
you
as
can
Season
lifesteal
3
off
rolled
that.
around,
Let him
not
lifesteal.
only because they had a very flexible build path because of Brutalizer, but also this item was just very good in its own right. Champions such as Kha'Zix could be played in the jungle, but also very effectively as a mid and top lane assassin. For Season 3 as well, we saw the rise of Talon and Zed being viable mid lane assassins, and a few of them could even go top. Zed had a few decent top lane matchups. And eventually, one of the first adopters of Renekton as a very viable top laner with Black Cleaver was TSM's Dyrus in the early parts of the Season 3 LCS. And for a while, this is pretty much what you saw. Lane Kha'Zix being relatively dominant, champions like Renekton, Mundo, and Shen still being as good as ever, and Jax just creeping up in there as a relative.
Why did you walk into that, bro?
Kha'Zix and Riven and Renekton and Talon and Jace
Nah,
didn't
dude, yeah.
always have to go Black
If I had
Cleaver
ult up,
first
she would've been
item.
dead.
And there was one other item that they were using that made them very, very powerful, and up until its removal in patch 4.2 is probably one of the most unbalanced and unfun to play against metas and items to ever exist. But of course, as a Riven player, it was great. Bring it back, Riot, please. Good work, good work. Nice. Good job. If you were playing an early game champion and you started this item, it was an absolute nightmare for your opponent. Elixir of Fortitude was a starting item that only cost 250 gold before its eventual nerf to 350 gold, and it gave your champion health,
You wouldn't have had to
AD,
flash if you
and
would've just
so
picked up
much
my
healing
Ws.
power that no other starting item, no matter what, whether you start Longsword, Cloth Armor, Doran's Blade, could even remotely compete with. Not only was it just that good, but you got more potions, and it gave you an instant burst of health, not only being able to surprise your opponent, but allowing you to escape and survive.
I'm
waves.
getting the harp stacks.
This item alone made it nearly impossible to lane versus early game champions because the threat of dying level 1, level 2, level 3
think he's
was
gonna
just
push here.
so incredibly high. Any champion who could use this well basically made it impossible for you to play the game. And from the early to middle season of Season 3, all the way until the middle of Season 4, so for about a year worth of time on the timeline, we basically saw this massive early game dominance of these amazing champions such as Riven, Kha'Zix, Renekton,
Did he go the
Zed,
takedowns give extra gold thing?
murdered you in the early game, and in solo lanes,
He might have. I think that's the yellow
awesome.
trait.
But eventually, Riven got nerfed, Zed got nerfed, Renekton got nerfed, Talon's silence was removed, and we started to see the nerf of the red elixir, and then eventually on patch 4.2, it was completely removed from the game. So the question then becomes, what now? How do we go from these early game champions such as Riven, Kha'Zix, Renekton, taking Ignite every game, Jax taking Ignite, just murdering you over and over in the early game, assassin meta, quick games, to these very long, very drawn out, incredibly slow
That's just
games
rude.
for top lane, where it's just a tank versus a tank in competitive play, there's almost no action. How do we go from there to now in just a couple of years? How did the meta
It's always the
drastically
players that run
change
into
in
Lux
play?
Qs that
As I just
complain
said, there
about
were
other
direct
champions not
nerfs
taking
to
skill.
champions, but that wouldn't completely 100% change the meta. It wouldn't go from bruisers
Why?
to tanks. But there would be one change that
These traps
would
are so annoying.
impact top lane meta for a very long time, and that is the buff to teleport.
I don't really want to go in until the he gets back. I don't know where he is. Ice mid.
If I had to pinpoint one of the most important points of all of top lane's history while making this video, it would be patch 4.4, when teleport received a buff. Teleporting to an allied turret now refunds 100 seconds of the cooldown,
Should get
and
him.
the channel duration reduced from 4 seconds to 3.5 seconds. And just like that, within the span of a
I like
few
it how
seconds,
Lux ran
the
away
forward
after I
teleport
ulted the
was
ADC.
removed,
That's
and
pretty
teleport was
hilarious.
buffed, meaning we saw a drastic shift in
Dragons,
meta
no
from
vision.
Ignite to teleport. For a very long time in League's history, teleport went
grab
relatively
it.
unchanged. It was used, but it wasn't really used by the champions
this turned
nowadays.
real quick.
It wasn't the go-to summoner spell for top lane. Really, only champions such as maybe Singe, or Ryze, or Nasus, somebody who wanted to
this
scale
red.
or split push, realistically use teleport. Most of the time, if you were Riven, or Renekton, or Trundle, or Shyvana, somebody with dueling power, or some kind of bruiser or tank,
Wait, did they steal it?
still
No,
died.
they didn't steal it.
After this buff, however,
doesn't
we
want
saw
the
the
W?
Rivens
I can
and
take it.
Renektons and the Irelias of the world start taking teleport, and once we arrived at the Season 4 World Championships, we saw a very
And
heavy
it's
teleport
backing.
meta for top lane. There was hardly any ignites.
I can
And
maybe save the
this
tower.
was a turning point. This was a
pretty low,
massive turning point for top lane. And if you don't believe me, if you actually look and you
Just gonna
go
win while me.
through at the selection of champions over the years for
It's
top
fine.
lane, and we actually pinpoint Season 4, you will see this massive influx of champions like Lulu and Ryze and Rumble top lane. You mostly saw these ranged AP champions come back because they couldn't be punished by these bruisers anymore. Let's go through from Season 3 to Season 7 in competitive
Tried
play.
to farm a
Let's
little
look
bit
at
there,
the
but
presence
Nivea's
of the picks
pretty
and
fast
the
getting back
bans
to lane.
for
We'll
top
see if
lane
we can sponge
champions
up some
all throughout
XP and
the
then grab
seasons.
the
Let's just see how drastic it is.
slow
For Season
active.
3 top lane, we had 3 classic bruisers be picked in the top 7. Renekton, Jax, and Shyvana, and even at
I
the
gotta
time,
wait till
Shen
my
was
support
picked a
thing
lot,
pops
but
up
he was
before I can
also
ward
more
again.
of a bruiser than a tank back then. For Season 4 at the very beginning, we did have these bruisers be good, but that was because at the beginning, we had Ignite champions. After the teleport buff, Renekton, Shyvana, and Mundo
long does
basically
this thing
became
take?
the triad of top laners, and they were picked a ton. We also saw the rise of Lulu top. And once we entered Season 5, this is where things started to make a turning point.
I don't know why he
Most
healed.
picked top lane champions then became Maokai, Gnar, Hecarim, who was a bruiser but built very tanky, Shen, bruiser slash AD Fizz, Lulu, and Rumble. We started to see a focus away from these bruisers. And once we got to Season 6, this arguably became the
That clear is
worst
pretty
meta
crazy.
for top lane bruisers. Poppy, Tank Echo, if you remember at the time, with Grasp of the Undying and Iceborne Gauntlet, Gnar, Trundle, who is a tank, or he's a bruiser, but he beats tanks because he steals the resistances, Maokai, Shen, and then the only real carry champion top lane was Gangplank because historically he does very well into tanks. And finally, Season 7 rolled around.
I don't
and this
know why
is when
they're
Fervor of
letting
Battle
us
was
take
good,
bots
mind you.
more.
This is when champions like Renekton and Jarvan on our list could
Maybe
take
they're
Fervor of
rich.
Battle and
Let's see
do
what I can
well
get
versus
mid.
tanks, even though they were basically tanks themselves. They built very tanky, but once again, we really didn't see a shift away from the tank meta. Shen, Maokai, Nautilus, Gragas, and then we had Rumble, Renekton, and Jarvan. So, what does this mean? Does this just mean the entire class of bruisers is completely dead and they're unusable? There's no way bruisers are ever going to come back to competitive play? Well, not really. I don't think so. One of the important things to get out of the way and to note, because it's kind of the elephant in the room, in solo queue, bruisers are still good, and they were basically good throughout this entire process as well. I would say from my time playing, Season 6 was the single worst season for bruisers and carries. The combination of Iceborne Gauntlet and Grasp of the Undying was so prevalent that basically carry and bruiser AD champions top lane were not viable whatsoever. And in Season 7, I thought bruisers were great in solo queue. Champions like Fiora and Riven and Renekton with Fervor of Battle were very good. But the underlying issue with top lane, at least for competitive play, doesn't really have a lot to do with the bruisers, but it has a lot to do with the
I might
game
just E into
itself.
them.
I think that ranged champions are just too good, and we've seen this
I should've
complaint
done that
from top
earlier
laners
if I
for
wanted
a
to.
while. And basically, you can see through history, this was a problem. As stated in the very beginning of this video, at one point in League's history, back in way early Season 1 and pre-Season 1, range versus melee was an issue. But with AD carries and supports and mid laners having so much range, so much
Look at that
CC,
damage.
a lot of healing, it just makes it harder for bruisers to have a true impact on the game at the very highest level. And through my research, that's kind of what I've noticed. Throughout times of bruisers being dominant and being the best class in the game, it was either through two
I really
means.
outtraded the
One,
Lux
the
there.
bruisers were always tanky
Bard
if they
is
were good.
so strong
When bruisers were
sometimes.
strong, it was because of things like Atmog. They weren't full damage, full assassin bruisers. They were definitely tanky, but they dealt damage. If you even think about the Black Cleaver meta, obviously that made champions like Riven and Talon and
Dive me.
Renekton very good, but in part, they were tanky because they got health from the Black Cleaver. In no time
probably
in
shouldn't
League's
have taken
history were
that,
bruisers
but he
really
wasn't worth
good
that much
because they were
gold, so I
full
think
damage,
he's
full
defeating.
assassin. It was because they really were tanky on top of dealing damage. But I think now that exact role has become what tanks do. Tanks deal damage, but are more tanky and have more AoE and control. And lastly, the other reason that bruisers were good before was because of the fact that they were impossible to 1v1 for top lane. With Ignite and the Elixir of Fortitude, it made them so good because tanks really couldn't get out of
Wait, what happened to
it
the
didn't
other
really
person
matter
on
in
this
Season
thing?
3 and Season 4 that Maokai was god tier late game just like he is now. The problem was getting there. In these early game, early pressure junglers were really popular as well. Back in Season 3 and Season 4, Elise and Lee Sin
If they
were
want to
amazing
take the
junglers,
drag, we
which
can
meant
push
that if
this
you
instead.
tried to play a tank top lane, you were just going to get dove by Renekton Elise or Lee Sin Riven. There was no way to get out of lane as a tank. But
Oh
I
wow,
don't think
Dragon's
the
free too.
balance of saying that tanks are widely
If anyone
OP
comes in, I
is
can ult it.
necessarily true. I just think their counters aren't strong enough at countering them.
Oh, this
Much
is
in the
good.
same way that I think right now, there aren't a lot of counters for mid lane. With the issues of mana and mana flow ban and games taking a really long time to get going, the issue is just that things that would beat Azir historically, like Zed, just aren't true anymore. Zed gets smashed by Azir. But that's just my opinion, and that's based on my research. Let me know what you thought in the comment
Damn,
section.
I got
down
the
below.
stun off,
If you
but,
enjoyed the video, make sure
I
you
thought
like
they
and
would all come
subscribe. And this has been the history of
That
Top.
was pretty dumb of me. I should have just ulted over here. I didn't know exactly where they were, because we don't have that much vision. Let's see. Probably some CDR next. Maybe some armor. Do I even get to armor from here? Whatever. Want this one. Intentionally AFK. He intentionally left his computer.
For League of Legends, Lee Sin has to be one of the most iconic champions in the whole game. And as one of the most recognizable characters in all of gaming, no less, his popularity, his presence, and consistency as a viable and top-tier meta pick is almost completely unmatched. There aren't many other champions with the fluidity, movement, skill expression, and fun gameplay that he has to offer. Even if there are players who don't like playing against him and think that he's unfair, seemingly he's still one of Riot's best designed champions. He is one that will forever be remembered by the player base long after League of Legends dies. But what if I told you it almost never was? Lee Sin, with his original design, was the first ever cancelled champion. More than 10 years ago, Riot had to pull the plug on his kit. And if it weren't for the community, we may have never seen him come to life. From a champion that
Oh, they
Riot
surrendered.
thought would be dead,
I was wondering why I was
never
chasing these
returned,
guys.
to arguably their most famous
We're 1 in
champion
4
ever.
Yasuo.
This is the story.
That
of Lee Sin.
underfed beauty. Alright, let's see the damage. Nice. E and I representing.
With the wrong mattress protector can ruin the feel of your mattress?